Welcome everyone, I'm Louise Crowe, I'm Chief Executive of My Society. Thank you so much for joining us today for this TICTeC community gathering from digital public infrastructure to democratic public infrastructure. Just as a brief reminder, TICTeC stands for the Impacts of Civic Technology. TICTeC started life as a conference, but since 2020 we've been running year-round activities to try and connect people building, using and researching technology to strengthen democracy and civic power, with the aim of helping us learn from each other and boost our collective impact. So, ahead of the Global DPI Summit next week, we thought this was a good time to talk about civic tech's relationship to digital public infrastructure. What are we talking about when we say digital public infrastructure? Well, as we're about to hear, all over the world, governments are implementing fundamental digital systems to enable improved delivery of services, to try and facilitate data exchange and to foster economic growth. And we know that DPI initiatives are leading to benefits for citizens, so they can access vital services like social payments and healthcare without the need to queue for hours and hours at government offices. But should we be thinking beyond that and beyond service delivery to ways to provide opportunities for citizens to participate more fully in decision making? What are the risks and opportunities around that? And are there lessons from the growth in DPI for building transparency, accountability and citizen participation infrastructure? So, lots of big questions. To help us contextualise and maybe answer a few of them, we're delighted to be joined today by two fantastic speakers. We have Richard Gievers, the Head of Service Design and Delivery at the Digital Services Unit of the South African Presidency, and Sanakaisa Salaranta, Specialist in the Democratic Innovations Programme at Citra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. Firstly, we're going to hear from Richard Gievers, who's got substantial experience working outside of government on civic tech projects as well as now within government, and he's going to talk about his work implementing DPI at the national level in South Africa, as well as thoughts that he has on the relationship of that to democratic participation.
So, yeah, welcome everyone. As mentioned, Richard Gievers, formerly call myself a recovering economist turned data scientist turned technologist turned founder of Open Cities Lab, which was a civic tech it's still going. I'm not there. Is a really good civic tech organization that runs data and digital government projects across Africa, and have now joined the presidency as we see. We get into that, and I think when thinking about the topic today. DPI can do much more than government service delivery and government efficiency. It can strengthen trust, transparency, and participation. And I probably should have highlighted the can rather than the others. So in the context of what we're working in, we're trying to understand how this infrastructure that is meant to rapidly deliver a much better social protection link between social protection and employment, and I'll get into that. Also enables citizens to shape decisions that affect them in the design across the ecosystem. So just some context, and apologies for those that may have seen similar slides at TICTeC. I'll go through these fairly quickly. But like many countries, South Africa was exposed in the pandemic around its ability to deliver services. So history of siloed and outdated and inefficient digital infrastructure, the stuff we know, meant that we couldn't prove people were who they said they were. We couldn't pay them easily. Rapid development and some very good pilots and prototypes and projects and a universal grant came into place as a result of this. But mostly across the board, things kind of ground to a halt. And so there was plans made to create this digital transformation roadmap. And they happened to evolve at the time that DPI became something that became a common global language. And I think also for the first time, and why I hopped into into government was the first time I saw Director General, so our highest level civil servants, government ministers, presidents, starting to understand that this isn't the sort of domain of IT as they would describe it, but the domain of government and society. Everyone knows the sort of future. You've probably seen this a lot. A lot of talking about what DPI is and stacks. This diagram, actually originally created by Richard Pope, talks about this sort of idea of reforming governments from silos into your data and hardware shared infrastructure and services. I'm presuming I'm talking to a DPI enabled crowd, and so going to not spend a lot of time on that. But I think a lot of what's Louise was saying has been interesting, and I'm sort of walking a line from being a civil servant, but from the context of my background, because what these slides show is that was compelling to South Africa was faster services, less fraud and corruption, uh, savings. You can see there the economic impact being very prominent in these slides of happening of DPI experiences around the world. And an understanding of DPI as data exchange, payments, identity, and then the services layers that sit on top of it. I think one of the things that we're trying to break into the zeitgeist or kind of build capacity around is that when you start to create a universal service channel, when you start to do things like implement data exchange across the country, digital ID, um, to government to people payments and vice versa, it creates channels that can carry both services and voice. And you've got to be very deliberate. We are trying to be very deliberate in our design that that voice isn't going one way from us to people. Um, and so when we on LinkedIn, I've started to develop and write week notes. There's a lot more communications that'll be coming out of this whole project as we try to work in the open and really take that principle work in the open, show the thing very seriously. But building in openness, consent, and transparency can obviously do way more than just pay someone their grant or help them not have to stand in a queue. And can start to ask, one of the key connections I made at TikTok actually was with Polis, who I owe a lot of apologies to because it's taken a long time for us to collaborate. We're starting to get to a point where there will be a collaboration around building Polis into our universal service channel to be a way that we can chat to citizens about the design and implementation of our DPI. But this can enable participatory budgeting, policy consultations. What we've seen is when going into any of our government's websites, department teams, that being the main way apart from a government office, um, that people receive services, no user feedback loops, nothing, no ability to communicate past probably an email address around. And so we're really looking at the chain of service design, which is why I fought hard for that to be in my title. Um, I think also at the data level and registries level, we've got opportunities and risks around what's happening with open APIs, data exchange, what will go into AI and how how AI comes into this environment. Um, but I think there's the risk of doing a little bit what I would say the way I described it was back in open data days when Trump became president and all of a sudden some of the naiveties around openness and open access to information were exposed and led to harm, whereas some other areas where openness hadn't been so focused and should have been, like meant that there wasn't transparency. And there's a really good discussion in DPI around like the implementation. Does the private sector implement something? Does government implement something, or is it self-sovereign? And I think right now people are seeing the move around DPI very much from a supply side type of thinking and very much from a commoditizing or taking back areas in digital infrastructure that the private sector has taken over. But I think it needs to go further into what, and the next question, and what should not be government, but actually owned by citizens and residents and people. Our through a lot of well, and maybe not enough, but through significant amounts of user design around the drawing of this strategy, this digital roadmap that South Africa launched in May 2025 this year, and which set up the DSU and started this journey towards DPI, was this sort of archetypal South African Tundi. And so, the idea would be Tundi early school, like a school leaver that's done really well at school, looking for employment opportunities, looking for further educational opportunities, likely to have a young child, likely to be supporting people that live in a more rural area with digital access issues and digital literacy issues, and a platform, My Mzansi, that sort of uses the benefits of DPI to reach out. But when you're talking about democracy, in the next phase, she doesn't just have to receive, it can be that two-way flow, and can start to be a discussion between people and government about what they want their government to be. And I think that that's something that is not, again, with not very clear in our strategy yet. We've all probably seen this sort of in a lot of your countries where you are much further in this journey, the sort of change of view towards life stage versus having to know the supply side government department that you need to go to, and being stuck in this mire of local to national to departments to agencies and trying to navigate government. So the whole idea here is, how does Tandy get stuff, have something that she can access based on her need? So demand driven, demand pulled kind of approach. And so we've set up a number of projects around this, which include your classic digital identity, trust ecosystems with verified credentials. We've just launched an X-Road-based data exchange, called Mzansi Exchange. Next week, we're going to be launching more, which I might give a little sneak peek of, because this video will come out after that, and so I won't be in trouble for sharing things early. But I think right at the bottom, what's been quite interesting is a lot of reading into this is that, so this is big, that quote from Mike Bracken and David Eves and I think it's Michelle Ronsky. That paper basically was said, that services beget stacks, stacks don't beget services. And the whole idea of, if you're going to go from a DPI approach, which quite frankly, the even framing around DPI has really got a lot of what a lot of us have been doing for the last 15 years. A lot of government as a platform thinking, a lot of demand driven kind of, well, this is where it has to go, is the sort of service or demand driven space. And so I'm less interested in, DPI will be around until donors are bored, and then it'll be the next thing. So to our community, it's about what I think it has really helped with was, we always found in civic tech we were hitting up against very embedded infrastructural and government structure problems that were really preventing our ability to build accountability, to build openness. And so I think the sort of supply side focus on the actual infrastructure of the state has been critical, but the risk is that it overplays its supply side hand and doesn't remember that everything has to be a demand pull from the citizen need, or the people need. These are very governmenty slides I've presented in before, but just sort of to back the idea that this is the first time in probably 20 digital transformation plans of South Africa that we've seen a whole of government adoption. So a steering committee that is led by the presidency and our national treasury, so and our digital department. So DGs are responsible for work streams that implement those technical things, but also the others. And I think this is where it's interesting, because we need to move from, I mean, the first thing this does is try to coordinate a whole of government approach, but it has to be a whole of society approach. And again, that to me is the jump to democracy. So people are, consultants made this with us. I was one of the drafters, and I have to take culpability myself. People have a house, a vision house. Everyone's excited about the stuff on the left. Um, but I think it's the stuff on the right, 5 to 8, that's going to change the future for South Africa and for the people on the continent we work with. South Africa often becomes a good lab for the continent, in some ways, and in some ways it isn't. But that pointing to that a vibrant non-government community, a lot of what we're looking through now is what are our government mechanisms that include civil society, civic tech, participation platforms, power feedback, transparency, accountability. So, what's nice that this is baked into the strategy. It's cabinet adopted, presidency led, busy building into institutional reform so that it's not reliant on presidential administration terms. But I think what's also very key there is this sort of idea of how do we build in everything from implementation to safeguarding to monitoring to participation to trusted intermediaries in our approach. And that's going to be the kind of things that create, these sorts of things. I'm going to send these slides through, and you can find out more about a lot of this at Biomzansi because I've got 5 minutes. We got given 5 minutes extra, so I want to jump into something a little bit more, a couple more key points. I think one of the biggest problems for me in DPI, in places where it's been interpreted as very government heavy, is that it is very government efficiency heavy. And I would say and I've said this and people have disagreed with me, but I think government efficiency is a trap. Platform Land by Richard Pope and other books, Recoding America, the sort of books that are leading like some of the thinking around digital and government. They all point to the fact that, I mean, firstly, this is, digital and service design responds to policy. And so if we're not sorting out policy, then DPI is limited in its ability to, and so the link to have impact. So the link between policy and service design that then drives the way that the DPI comes together into services is a piece that I think is under focused on in our current thinking. But then I think also, I mean, we've obviously seen Doge and my uh, I always have to apologize for my countryman who claims to have started Tesla and did all of the Doge things. But um, efficiency gains and cost saving government is not a bad thing. But if you stop there, it risks not actually changing anything significantly. It might mean more people get granted. It might mean some real outcomes for sure. But um, I think one of the key focuses for us in the way we're measuring ourselves, and there's been some very good impact. So Dial has put out a very good impact measurement tool and others, starting to think, how do you make sure you're essentially measuring your impact on how this helps society? At my previous organization, we had this realization in civic tech that we don't, that we often work in ecosystems where if you're shopping for running shoes and you buy a pair of running shoes, you're the donor, the customer, the user, and the beneficiary. Civic tech taught us, and DPI needs to take this on, that your customer, your beneficiary, or your user, and the money are all often different and have overlapping but not fully aligned goals. And they're all going to pull you in different directions in terms of how they measure your success and impact. And so learning how to create frameworks that make sure that like the citizen or the person living in South Africa, whether they're citizens or not, if they're visiting, are the ones who are at the top of that framework of impact and not the donors' needs, and which is very difficult, especially when that becomes fiscus funding, and not the customers' needs, which is often government leadership, might not even be the user needs, which could be a government worker or an intermediary, when the beneficiary is someone without digital access. But actually that it sort of ends up there that sort of framework of thinking about impact is really critical. Um, yeah, so I mean, I put a bunch into like the um, appendix just to like close out on what we're doing. These were scribbles of mine that became a prototype. Um, and I think just a lot of things around, democracy at different levels. What does democracy and data and registries mean? Democracy and shared components and service design. A lot for us is just that as we build this MyMZansi gov.za single universal port like channel to services, that accessibility and security, localization, data minimization, et cetera, are built into the core of the design. Um, and so what we're in this sort of method of doing is also trying to embed open, and so we'll publish quite soon. I mentioned my week notes. We'll publish quite soon our principles and our early service design manual design system, but really baking in the reuse of open source systems into this sort of stack that we're creating, and the service design that leads us through the sort of single portal, whether it's an app or a screen in a service center in person or a website or a trusted intermediary that's doing things for you. You're able to access your government from end to end through, this one place and then talk to us about it. I mean, I think one of the things we're trying to do in the implementation of DPI is firstly show that there's a lot of solved problems. So this is working software. This is a thing I say that we'll be showing the public for the first time um, on Tuesday next week in the DPI summit. But we put this together in 10 weeks. It'll be available to the public in the first half of 2026. But so, there are a lot of known problems inside government and democracy that we know people need to give government information, and government needs to store that information and apply it. We know it needs to do checks to understand eligibility for grants. We know these things. And so trying to rapidly move through the things we know to make sure that our design is around contextualization, localization, and the stuff we don't know is really critical. And so what I've just kind of demoed is the fact that, from we've gone really rapidly into something that we're going to start to put into as many people's hands as possible, just, so that between now and launch, we are able to start to get and hear this feedback and start to build these loops in. But that sitting underneath there is, as I say, like a lot of what came out of GDS, what came out of it's X-Road, it's come out of India, it's come out of Brazil, and we use gov.br/DS for our design system base. And so I know as civic technologists, we've always said, I suppose taking the idea of big civic, small technology. And the biggest challenge for us is to say, well, what are the gaps in the service from end to end, from policy to someone getting what they need and being able to express it back and have that two-way flow? And then how does the technology fit into that? What are solved problems? And then what do we have to solve? But trying to keep that idea of like the end user need and the ability to participate and then hopefully eventually deliberate kind of at the core.
Now let's pass on to Sanna Kaiser, who is going to talk about Citra's work on citizen participation projects and their ideas about scaling up participatory democracy.
Well, first of all, honored to be invited by My Society here. This is a big opportunity for me to talk about our work and what amazing work My Society has been doing for impactful civic tech. This is all followed by us and praised by us in Citra. And today I'm going to show you what we have done, how we have approached advancing democracy in Finland. I'm going a bit deeper dive into civic tech, and I'm also going to talk about one kind of piece of democratic public infrastructure we have been drafting with our team for the EU to enable impactful civic tech on such a wide scale. But let's get started. So I work as a specialist in a democracy innovation program in Sitra. And our mission in Sitra is it's an independent future fund. We are not using money from the government budget. We run in the return of our own investment fund. We are still accountable to the Finnish parliament, so we work closely together with the public sector. You can consider us as an innovation driver and funding partner. And this is how we approach change and innovation in Finland. So when we advance democracy, what do? So we are helping authorities and decision makers to address the growing societal crises. We help them strategically develop citizen participation for their use, and that they can solve these biggest problems of our times, and on a national level, regional level, local level. For example, just to bring a bit more broad perspective, it's not only civic tech that I'm delving into. We have also we've been also advancing deliberative democracy. We've been building capacity, for example, for citizen assemblies. You have services for sortition, not only for research. Then you have also facilitators we've been educating. Now we have actually educated an educator and networks of facilitators for citizen assemblies. And then we have used civic tech with the deliberative processes, civic tech alone in different processes. And this all needs capacity building. And today, when I'm talking in different terms than Richard before, and because my background is actually in social and public policy, and this, I think it's really nicely giving a different kind of view and perspective to the discussion today. So now it's the time for next slide. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to delve more into our experiments and how we've been scaling, implementing, routing into a societal use policy platform. And I think many in the audience know this platform. It's developed by the Computational Democracy Project in Seattle, USA. First, we collaborated with them and one in-house company called DigiFinland. We wanted to have a service provider in Finland that can use this open source tool. And that was the first capacity building project together with DigiFinland. We installed open source code to their cloud. We made it GDPR compatible and this kind of first version that we can start to experiment with. And we started to experiment with the first round in 2023. We had these counties that are responsible for health and social care services in Finland. They were a newly established layer of governance. And we want to make sure that this level of governance is actually recognizing the democratic perspective when they are developing this governmental level. So it was a strategic decision to start on the regional level. And we had more than 30 different policy conversations, and all these were different processes, different topics, always connected to a different decision-making process. And yes, they were always conducted by the civil servants who were working in the public sector, regional authorities. They had a small team, different capabilities, communications, substance, person who has the substance skills for this topic, and also a person who can do this kind of participatory processes internally. And they drafted this process, and they were taking the buy-in from the political side and building structures for the processes. And we had also learnings and recommendations after this round as a paper. It's unfortunately only in Finnish. But we did also our own experiment with Polish platform those days. We had a bigger nationwide "What do you think Finland" campaign. And it gained 18,000 participants on the Polish platform. And it was discussed a lot. We framed it also as we have technology that can be used for good, constructive discussion among thousands and thousands of participants. This kind of technology exists. Come and give your opinion about the future direction Finland should take. This was also in the morning news and everywhere, so it blew up. We didn't expect so many people to join, but it was an amazing experiment. We learned a lot, also did some technical fixes with this kind of scale. We got user feedback, a lot about the user interface, and after this, we knew that we can't go on without renewing the user interface. I think sometimes civic tech practitioners are criticized that they are too much concentrated on the UX and UI. I think it's still rather important. You have to meet it's the window what you meet. We made a mobile first version of this Polish platform, and this was done with different demographies of people, young people, elderly, interviews, design workshops together with civil servants. This was a joint process that needed to be done, and now it is, in Finland's context at least, user interface that we are happy about, and we can continue. And now this year we have made a second pilot round. We have been piloting in schools, municipals, ministries, government agencies, NGOs, again, different topics. We had also our constitutional AI process, and one national one we did on our own. So what kind of rules AI should have when it's used in the public services, in public sector, this kind of discussion we ran. There were over 6,000 people taking part of it, and the analysis is going on. But now we come then to next step. We found out that, okay, if we want to scale this effectively, now we start to have capabilities and skills around Polish platform. We still need to have more service provider, not only one service provider that can offer this in Finnish context. We need more of them. Otherwise, it's too risky that when we are getting away as a Citra from this field, that the story goes down. We funded this kind of open source community. It's run by Open Source Finland. And first decision this community made was that they changed the name. And it was a good one because police actually is a police officer in Finland, and it goes too near when we have discussions about the security situation. It just doesn't fit. And this is okay, a story and experiences gathered in a long term now. But as it's often said, it's less about the tool, but more about the effective process we are able to build to support the decision making. And when I was talking about these experiments we have been funding and instructing and done together with civil servants, they could always create a method that was fit for their own resources. And they could build around Voxit, so meaning the Polish platform. They could build around this kind of maxi public, mini public themes, have a final report, have a decision made based on that. This is just layering one example of one Northern Karelian area where this was made. And step by step, they have done this. And I think they have done amazing improvement in a way that they don't only tell about the outcome, but they also tell about the impact of these processes. But it's a learning curve, and you need to be doing civic tech that you learn the most of it. There needs to be place and space for that kind of experimentation. And then we have been watching a long time Finland, but we also start to get more and more questions all around Europe. So how did you start it to scale this policy platform, and can you tell more about it? And then we also see, okay, there's a momentum now in Europe. Everybody is looking at the democratic backsliding happening in different countries. EU is gonna push now for Democracy Shield program, having investments on democratic resilience. And this shouldn't be only, in our view, it shouldn't be only about protecting from outside threats. It should be also about renewing democracy. And this is why we started to draft with our team an European civic tech hub. And this could be one point of view to a democratic public infrastructure that enables thriving European civic tech ecosystem. And this hub, so go further, it has two purposes. One is to strengthen and renew European democracy by helping to anchor these effective use of civic tech into a policy making at local, regional, national, European levels. Second, enhance European technological sovereignty by creating a European ecosystem for civic tech, platforms, solutions, and services. And how we approached that something like this could exist already, about what kind of services this kind of hub could offer for the civic tech industry and citizens. We needed to first delve into bottlenecks and do an analysis what is really needed. And here I've highlighted some of these bottlenecks for you to see what kind of the analysis and what are the problems that this civic tech hub needs to tackle and build the services on. If you watch from the citizen side, you might lack of trust of different civic tech tools. You don't want them to be used in the decision making. That's also not always clear. But you have to earn that trust with many kind of ways. You have to have open technology. You have to show that they can make a difference, that they can be trusted. Then there's also an awareness. When can I participate? And as Richard was before explaining well, this should be also seen through one app. And just to give a bit provocative here, it's actually funny. We live at times that you can order a package from Amazon and follow it step by step when it's delivered to you. But then we can't follow legislative process, how it's approaching step by step, and when is my time to have a say. We have done as a Citra also work to map the legislative process. It is messy, but it's an important work. We also do on the national level, and you have to create a quite heavy infrastructure and system that you are able to use that app and also follow when it's my turn to have a say. But it's all possible, I believe. And then bottlenecks from the public authority side. There's a lack of skills, awareness, and trust. They see that, oh, there's a lot of different tools here. Where do I start to look for one? They might be rated to some level, but they need quite a lot of information about the maturity of these technologies. And there's just a lot of skills you also need when you are trying to imagine and building this kind of processes around different civic tech tools. Then there's also when public sector themselves, they try to build technologies, civic tech tools internally, it's often a project that ends, and then there's always lack of resources for maintenance, then comes the security problems, etc. So it's not the most optimal always to have it built fully internally and then be fully in depth with different kind of other services and interoperability first thinking. Then there's a lack of collective learning for these different regional and national level civil servants. What could they do and how they could use these tools? There's a lot of interest for learning together, but and then also highlighting the complexity when you use open source tools. The procurement processes are not easy. It's not easy to deploy these, especially if you are like myself, you're not a data scientist, you are a participatory democracy expert. So then on the other hand, you have European civic tech communities, you have startups and companies, like our Voxit open source community. There's just lack of resources for open source development and maintenance, or constant lack of resources. There's even situations that the company wants to open source its tool, but it's just too costly, even though there are synergies and you could gain a lot together in a community. Small seed funding or something would help a lot further. And complexities of compliance. So I know as we have been scaling this together with the service providers, so kind of civic tech companies, you always meet different kind of interpretations of GDPR. Depends what kind of municipal officer you go. So some kind of labeling and standards should be used here and clarified better in this civic tech hub. Last but not least, the lack of spaces for experimentation, like we have done as Citra, is super important, that we can learn together and also develop jointly together with civil servants for their use these tools, and that the direction is right. They can actually be connected to decision-making scene. And also, if we think public services are definitely something important for democracy and that they function well, and digital infrastructure supporting that. But we also need to reach people outside of the services. This is what the democracy tool should be used for. Thank you. It was my pleasure to introduce this to you, and if you have further questions, I'm happy to think about it with you further.
Thanks so much, Sanna Kaiser. Really interesting, and reminds me when I was preparing for this session that the term digital public infrastructure, I think, originated in the deliberative community. So perhaps from both the presentations we can take away that they're not so far apart as we might imagine with the current focus on services. Richard has been answering questions in the sidebar busily, but I want to pull out the top one at the moment, and please do add others. The questioner wants to ask you both about the relationship between open source tools and the kind of infrastructure you're talking about. Do you feel like it is necessary that DPI is open source? Challenges and opportunities around that relationship?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And this is actually often asked from me, that what do you think about open source? And I think in a context of what I was just talking, more like a civic tech, and not that the whole infrastructure, government infrastructure, has to be open sourced. I think the path is a bit longer, but when we have such a platforms like, for example, Polis, yes, you don't have the vendor lock-ins that might create black boxes of how these tools are actually built and how they work. But it's not only that. It's you can have also a company doing services with their own really well-designed civic tech. And then you might have a civil servant who needs exactly the whole package and doesn't have resources to plan anything like this, what we have done here. And I think, especially on a national level, you need, maybe on the EU level as well, you need that kind of service provider, that there comes the technology, there comes the skill to help you to make the process. And I don't say that if you haven't open sourced your tool that you would be out of the game. I think they are serving many kinds of purposes now. But open source tool collaboration, it is competing with quality. And I think it's a good driving innovation system for civic tech.
Yeah. Richard, you're much more embedded in the service delivery end. What's your experience been?
I mean, I think that open source wrapping delivery in open source frameworks and open frameworks, which is different, is really critical. I don't think that within the service chains, it can't be that proprietary tools are used. I think there's a place for them. But I think that the standards and framework and implementation around anything that is proprietary should be such that it can be swapped out immediately with no cost to anyone, not financial or non-financial cost. And I think that that's really what we try to get across, is that, at OC's Lab, we stopped using civic tech as a term because even though that's what we do as a community. And in that, I also think with open source, open is not the same as open source, which is not the same as open data. Those are all conflated too much. To get to truly open society, I think that as a goal may mean frameworks that encourage openness and transparency, but it doesn't mean that the only way to digitally get there is with open source. It's to say, as I say, it's the environment safeguards and implementation and design methods you put in the place that allow for a chain that can include it. But I would say at its core, DPI is commoditizing, or at least leveraging open source to take back areas that it shouldn't have lost to the private sector. And then if you think about the opportunities on top of an open source, largely open source DPI, largely open source government as a platform, I think that gives a lot of opportunity and that's where you see the GDP bumps. And the last thing I'll say is, I think of that flag, but before and after the GDS flag, the map of the UK with technology providers to the States that had, I think, 5 dots around London, and then post 5 years later, you had that like over 1,000 dots across the UK of technology providers to the UK government, who were able to build open source and even proprietary tools on top of the public rails that were built, and that I think is really critical. Those are jobs and skills and capacity that are being built in-house in country rather than being shipped to Silicon Valley,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to come back to a question that you briefly answered in the sidebar, but I think it's a really important one, which is, how do we address the problem when citizens' feedback is not aligned with the policy roadmap or the agenda? And I guess I would build on that, thinking about when citizens want to interact with the government in more oppositional ways. So I guess question to both of you. Richard, you talked about services that are neither government nor private sector, but somewhere in between. How do where would we host that kind of service if it's less likely that the government is keen on developing it? And how do you fund it? Where do you situate it in institutions?
So that's a lot
Lots of difficult questions in one.
That's a lot of questions.
Whichever aspect you want to
I
address
mean, I think
briefly.
the point is there's never been more of a need for civic tech, and I think that once the hype around DPI starts to fade, I have a feeling that the next stage for us, because let's say AI is already here, is trust and back to open data.
Mm,
Um, weirdly. And the trust ecosystem. So basically the thing that says, we know we have privacy, but openness, we know we have digital trust in payments and data in, the sort of those sorts of things. So coming back to that, I mean, there's never been more of a need for civil society to be active. But then you said the funding question, and I'm like, I don't know,
mm,
which is a question we've been talking about, and now in the environment of a cut to budgets and things like that, to me, that's something we should almost be, and I've said this to the civil society groups, and this is going to go on YouTube, and my colleagues are going to hear this, and I'm going to get in trouble, but we should be giving them the platforms to shout at us,
mm,
or at least facilitating the space for those platforms to be created. That's where I see civic tech as crucial, you know.
mm.
Um, uh, if it's all going to be done by us, then there's no way we're gonna make sure that all voices are heard in, just I think fundamentally capacity wise, even if we had the best intent.
Yep. No, totally. And final words from you, Sana Kaiser, on that question.
I hope I get it right. It was a good question, and many questions that I started to think there. But about the civil society
Mm,
and broader civil society, how they could be using these tools, and where does this actually? I think there are roof organizations that could implement these tools and offer them almost as free. So we know this moment that there's a lack of resources, but there should be
mm,
institutions, kind of the rooftop institutions that offer the usage for free, education around them for free, that they are and they able to adopt them. And then the role, of course, is different. It might be not such a connection to decision making as it is harder to build on, but it's an important voice, because you have to also all the time bring out out of the political agenda, you have to raise the voice. And we have in Finland quite well institutionalized citizen initiative process. But alongside of that, I see that there should be better use of civic tech in the
mm.
civil society broad. So giving voices to those initiation processes would be really fruitful.
Terrific. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your work and your expertise. Thank you to you all for coming to listen. We are going to be hosting more TIC gatherings between now and the end of the year. So to hear about these, do subscribe for TIC email updates. Just to give you a taster, our next gathering will be the 11th of November on networked auditors, crowdsourcing and community-led access to information. And we're going to be hearing from some great organisations across Nigeria, Germany and Poland who've been working with volunteers for public interest transparency projects. So very relevant to that last point of discussion. And following on from that, we'll be meeting again on the 24th of November to talk about converting information from access to information requests to journalist-friendly resources. So thank you all once again, and to our speakers, and hope to see you soon. Bye everyone.